And it's so weird, that like dichotomy, because we want to collaborate to actually get things done, but we also want to be unique, and that those things are fighting against each other. That tension.
Yeah.
It's like we want to be a part of something bigger than ourselves, but we also want to be big ourselves.
What's up, guys? RLTKPHX Real Talk Phoenix, episode 23.
The GOAT number, Michael Jordan. Shout out, what's up?
Let him know.
The true
MJ.
GOAT, not LeBron
ESPN,
James.
Go ahead and drop that 30 for 30 and stop playing.
Please.
You know what I'm saying?
No
Especially
sports,
now,
we need it.
especially now we got coronavirus running around. We need something to watch because we
Thanks,
ain't got
Rudy
no
Gobert.
sports. Dang, that's super shady.
Did y'all see that video of him?
We did.
Running
We
around
did.
touching people's microphones
That
and
was
stuff?
funny.
That's messed up.
It was funny. All right. So we do have a guest.
Yes,
We've
sir.
been piling up on the guests. We know you guys were getting, bored of us.
Yeah.
So we decided, we'd get some interesting people on. So anyways.
An actual Gen Z.
Yep, we got an actual Gen Zer on the show today. My homie Dylan. We've been hanging out for a couple months now, and he agreed to come on. He's a college student, and he is going to drop some game on us today. So welcome, Dylan.
Yeah, thanks, Jordan. It's good to be here.
Yep, good to have you, bro. So let's get into it. Like we do with all of our guests, share some of your story with us, man. Where you from? How'd you get here? All that good stuff.
Yeah. So I guess I'll start with the classic, where I was born and raised, and that was in West Linn, Oregon. It's a small town about half an hour south of Portland, Oregon. Grew up with a kind of broken, divorced family, and that kind of, I didn't want it to define my life, but it was definitely just a part of my life. And so I just grew up with that, kind of getting shipped back and forth with my parents, doing a lot of things. I was really involved with sports all throughout my life. Lots of good mentors, lots of good coaches, and just made some really solid friends through my church community. And yeah, like just a little background about that place. Westland is kind of affluential kind of culture, pretty wealthy. It's like called middle class, but it's really upper middle class.
Okay.
If I'm being honest. And
Yeah.
with that comes a lot of those kind of things, which is things like like affluenza.
Mm-hmm.
People have entitlement. Don't really have a real sense of being in need. And so even in my faith community there was a big sense of people asking questions like, why do we need God? Not really like explicitly, but like through their lives.
Why do you think they were asking those questions?
I think that when you're in need and like you're in a town that doesn't have a lot to do and you're bored, like you don't ask, oh man, we really need God. We're just bored and we have money, so we turn to other things like you can fill in those blanks. But
yeah, for sure.
But yeah, that's kind of what I grew up in. So I was influenced by that a lot, and I kind of, in some senses, felt like I was on an outsider looking into that culture because I didn't really want that for my life.
Did you always feel that way?
Yeah,
like,
I mean,
always felt like uncomfortable in that environment.
I'd say that like I always felt there was just such a meaninglessness to it, and like living for that next weekend. And even when I was younger, like my friends and I kind of had agreed like, oh, we're not gonna get into drugs and alcohol. A lot of them got really deep in that place, and I kind of over the course of my life kind of turned to just staying away from that stuff. And like the result of that was isolation and at times, like
So just felt lonely a lot.
There was a decent amount of that. Again, I did have lots of good communities through sports and took on leadership pretty early because of that, I think. But within that leadership, didn't necessarily always have like the best community, and I didn't really realialize that till
because you probably felt the same way in those communities, didn't you?
Oh yeah, and I guess I realized that I didn't have community when I was in real community. I think it was more like a looking back kind of thing.
Tell us about that. What do you mean? When did you get real community, and what was it that you saw that you were like, oh, wow, this is what this is? Yeah, so
I guess it's crazy, but even through sports teams and stuff, I saw like the kind of half-hearted community that was like you're a community because you are on a team together, but you're not like real brothers. Like if I dropped out of a team, pretty quickly lost those friends. And then as I
get another person to replace you.
Yeah, and it's just like, oh, your position is like he's one of our guys now, and you're not like I really lost a lot of those friendships by not like especially through dropping out of football. That's definitely really like herd culture, and so the first time I really experienced community was I was serving at a Young Life camp for over a summer, and I was there for 30 days straight. They took our phones, which was we'll talk on that later, but like I think a huge impactor on actually connecting with people. And yeah, when I experienced people that just like had a common goal with me, and we were actually serving together and like spending a lot of time doing that, almost to a point of like exhaustion. And like I was exhausted, but doing that with people and having people that encouraged me and like and loved me where I was at was almost unique. And I thought I had that, but it was revealed to me that I didn't through them through having people that I yeah, like actually got to connect with, and that continued. As I left, I had those people, but then they obviously dispersed. We were from all over the country. A couple people from Spain even. So
Oh wow.
so
At
yeah,
this camp.
this was at the
What
camp
was it
I
called
worked
again?
at. It's called Young Life Camp, and this one's Washington Family Ranch in Central Oregon.
Explain for our audience. Not all of them may understand what Young Life is. Could you explain what that is a little bit?
Yeah, so Young Life is an organization that started about 75 years ago, and basically it was like the vision of this pastor that saw that youth were dropping out of his church, and so he instead of just trying to build a better youth group, wanted to go into their lives. So he started going to high school in Texas, and he just made his dwelling among them, kind of after the model that Jesus has made of making his dwelling among men. And he did that for kids, and pretty soon
Found they had a camp.
Yeah, and like eventually that led into camping ministry, and so still like the heart behind it is to be in kids' lives in their place, and then it eventually like turned into camping ministries all over the country, all over the world.
Cool. So you're at one of these camps.
Yeah.
And something had come out. One of the people who runs the camps there, they're talking to you, and this is where this revelation for you that you hadn't had real community comes from.
Yeah, and I think it's.
Could you dive into that a little bit? Like, what were some of the things that they were noticing in you that they were pointing out? Is this where all this understanding of the herd mentality of sports came from, or like what was happening at that camp that was making you come to an understanding of that?
Yeah, so I think the reason that was like the first place, not to say that I never had good friendships in my life, but it was just a place where the entire culmination of it was unified in our common purpose to serve kids that were coming to that camp. All volunteer. We didn't have our phones, so we just learned to connect.
Oh, gotcha.
We spent a lot of time in, for me specifically, the dining hall I was setting, bussing and serving tables the like entire day pretty much for 30 days straight. And I think there I found just people didn't have my whole context of my life, so they didn't know everything I'd been through, which like kind of gave them less prior judgment on me, or like
Gotcha.
kind of boxing me into
a judgment-free zone.
Yeah, and like there's the judgments you make in first impressions, but it's different when you don't know someone's whole background. That you can, I think it's easier to accept someone for where they're at because that's what you see, rather than like your friends and family at home see you from your whole life, and they kind of. I think we do this sometimes, and it's something that we can improve on. I think as a culture is not assuming we know people. I think because we can see what someone's been through in their life, and then we can actually over time really just box them in because it's kind of lazy, and it's kind of actually showing a lack of care because it's easier for us. Actually, it's more efficient. We're all about efficiency, you know. And
to
it's
make
like
judgments.
if that's the rugby captain guy. That's like what people probably saw me as, or that guy's really involved with church stuff. And it's easier to box them in than actually know them, know their story.
That's so good.
Yeah, it's a challenge for me too because I think I often can be quick to not actually like listen to someone's story. You know what I mean?
And I think we allow ourselves to be boxed in, you know, because it's easier for us to play a role than it is for us to go through the trauma of establishing our own identity. Totally. Okay, well, I'll be who you say I am because that's easier because it is trauma for you to stand up for yourself or for you to impose yourself. That's interesting.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you're coming to this revelation on this stuff, and then what happens next after that?
Yeah, so I went through a season my senior year of high school, which for many Gen Zers or any generation of kids knows it's a time where you're getting asked the same question for 9 months straight. What's next for you? And I think it's this pressure you feel. I definitely felt that pressure throughout my life. My school was a college prep school.
So you're telling me that you're 18 years old and you hadn't already figured out what you wanted to do with your life?
Well,
so let's get into a lot of debt to figure that out, right?
Right. Yeah. So you better go.
Shade.
If you don't have a good answer for that question, then you kind of feel that weight of like, I don't know yet. And people kind of say, oh, that's okay. You have time. And like, you kind of know though that they're asking that because they're waiting for that answer. And you feel good when you do have an answer, even though it's like a false, we don't really know what's next. And that's like the reality is we can create a cool plan for ourselves, but yet like I think that we sometimes like have circumstances come in our life that changes it a lot.
Absolutely.
And so that's what happened for me. I just really I looked at the bottom line of my dream schools and what it was going to cost, and I said, I don't know if my heart's in it right now to pay that, to do something I'm not sure about.
Right.
And so I actually ended up being one of the rarest kind of breeds of Gen Zers, which was taking a gap year. I chose to take a gap year, which meant that I was going to go back to college after taking some time off and doing something else, just to kind of explore my interest and what I was into. And so after a process of deciding that.
What happened through that gap year? Was there any benefit from that? Like, what did you discover?
Yeah, so I mean, I ended up
Are you glad you did it, or?
Oh, totally. I ended up deciding to go across the world and study the Bible in New Zealand, actually.
Oh, cool.
Which was alone was like such a cool opportunity. I didn't really ever dream for myself being in a college prep high school. Like, just thought I was going to go learn something, get some major, and kind of settle with that. It seemed like settling to me to do that. So going to New Zealand was like a huge leap of faith, in a sense of doing something cross-cultural or countercultural even. And
what were you doing over in New Zealand?
Yeah, so I was studying the Bible at a small Bible school called Cape and Ray. Through a big ministry called Torchbearers International. They've got like 25 or so Bible schools around the world.
Okay.
And it was a short-term Bible school, 6 months or a year program. I did the year program, and I got to just immerse into God's Word. Again, I found community that didn't have presuppositions of me, and I found mentors that had been through a lot of life, and along with that, I had like a different culture influencing my kind of thought processes, and even the way I saw things was the American way rather than the only way you can actually look at things. And
man, that's
really
great.
Really started this journey of what's true and what do I believe because people have told me to believe it, and what do I believe because I've actually tested the truth behind it. And that actually ended up opening opportunities for me to stay. So I was there for 2 years out there, and then that brings me.
Wow! So you stayed for an additional year.
Yeah, I stayed. They offered me a short-term staff position, and I'm so glad I had that, because I thought I was ready to leave. And I found out through some of the things I learned that second year, some humblings and some one of the bigger messages was that I kind of had created this life, especially in my faith of doing things for God, and I really learned that it was way more about my position or me being than it was about my doing. Kind of that old saying, like, we're not human doings, we're human beings.
Right. Yeah.
And I learned what it meant to be and what it meant to have a position, and that position for me is in Christ.
Yeah. Yeah.
And just like the things that follow that are immense, and there's it was a profound year. Obviously.
How was your family dealing with you staying in an additional year?
Yeah.
Or even going in the first place? What were the people in your life telling you about this? Were you?
Yeah. It was one of those things that I think each person took in different ways. They were excited for me, for the adventure. Some people in my life were skeptical and wondered if it was the best use of resources.
Right.
What was going to do for that was out of concern for my future. Like, I think that's a pretty common American thing is, if you don't get to college, how are you going to get a job? How are you going to provide for yourself? Like, how are you going to get bread on the table? Those kind of things were there, and I understood those things. But overall, I was supported, and they were excited for me. The distance was, I think, hard. Probably more for them than me, because it was so different for me. And for them, it was like just not having me there, and their lives definitely changing, but not being completely like different side of the world kind of change,
Yeah.
So I was accepted overall, but I would say that it was mostly a really good time that I embraced, and as opportunities came into my life, I embraced them and just got to see amazing change happen in my life and in a lot of other people's lives through that too.
Wow, that's really cool. So the change that happened that you just mentioned over there, what would you say was the primary thing that changed? Did you just have a sense of like Dylan? And the reason I asked this is we had a guest on recently, and she was talking about this idea of people are like, I just got to keep it 100, or I got to be 100% of who I am. And she's like, what are you talking about? Like, every part of who you are is created by the family you were raised in. And it's not until you leave and cut those strings, so to speak, and go off like you did and have this experience to find out who you are, right?
Yeah.
And I feel, and I don't want to put words into your mouth, but was there some sense of that going on? Like you were finding yourself, your own identity?
Oh, totally. I think that as much as you are becoming your own person as an adolescent, you kind of have to have some sort of independent journey before you start discovering who you are, because there's no, like, there's the parental influence and the, like, even the culture you grow up in. Like like I said, they kind of box you in. You become the Dylan of West Linn, of your hometown.
Yeah.
And you actually kind of get lost in that, and you kind of get used to playing a role. And I think for you to discover who you're supposed to be, like who you're actually becoming, you need to step away from that and have new eyes looking on you, kind of identifying who you are in that moment. And then, yeah, for me, it became this journey of like, I knew who I was becoming, but I'm still in a process of becoming that.
Yeah.
And it's, for me, I realized how much unrest in my life I'd experienced by trying to be someone else. I had a mentor say it to me simply. He said that everyone else is taken, and so as long as you're not being completely yourself,
man.
you're going to be exhausted. And I
Yeah.
had to look at that exhaustion and really had started to label it and saw it in my life. I like that. I was fulfilled so many times in my life, and it was amazing to reflect on and actually get to. Even in that time, especially with that second year, you get to grow into who I'm becoming.
Yeah.
And yeah, like when you have that assurance and people that are actually excited about you becoming who you know you are, like that, there's nothing like living like that. So
absolutely,
it launched me into the season I'm in now, in a really cool way, I think.
It is. And that's why, we always talk about this, that the role of an influencer in the life of a Gen Zer, right? Mm-hmm. This was someone who wasn't a parent, who wasn't, a family member as far as I understand, but it was someone who had a significant impact on your life that you were able to hear, that you trusted, that you believed in their character,
It's good.
Yeah.
Totally.
Influencers are so important, man.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So you find yourself now, fast forward, you're in college, so you actually finally make it, right?
Yeah.
To college as you're supposed to.
Make it, yeah, right.
Right? So
finally where he's needs to be.
Just finishing up. Which year?
So I'm actually in a weird situation based on credit. I'm like first semester sophomore right now, so it's kind of my third semester of credit, even though it's my second semester here as a student.
Cool. Mm-hmm. And so, what is it like being a college student today? Like, what is it like being a college student, being a Gen Z, hearing all the things that people say about you, say about your generation? Are those things true? Are those things false? Like, what are you seeing?
Yeah, I think college is this time where I'm watching a lot of people go on similar journeys to me in the different context of trying to learn who they are, really. Our GCU slogan actually is "Find Your Purpose," and I think the reason they attract so many students is because even if they think that's cliche, students are looking for that. They're looking for the meaning, and in college, it's definitely people are excited about whatever their major is, and they're exploring their interests. But they're more than that; they're just trying to discover identity, really. And I see that all around me. I see people kind of shaking loose the kind of identity they had in high school, or like the popularity they cared so much about, and really starting to actually become who they're supposed to be rather than who other people tell them to be. And I think that's obviously there's a lot of failure in that. There's a lot of mistakes, and people still do care about a lot of stuff that they wish they didn't, like their identity in other people's perspective, like what other people think. And I think we all do to some extent, more than we would like to admit. But it's really, I think that like college is different than just going to school in a sense that it's like a place you go where you kind of have a fresh start, and in that fresh start you really get to discover yourself, and also like at the same time you are making practical steps towards your independent life. So it's kind of like a breeding ground, like a greenhouse, as some people refer to it. A place to grow really fast, and then the hope is you get planted somewhere later on in life.
Especially leaving, from the state you were raised in and coming to a place like Arizona,
Yeah, I think we probably have every state represented in GCU, and then there's definitely a lot of international students too, which is cool. It's a cool place you can make friends from all over the world, and it's a pretty eye-opening thing to have that.
What are some of the things that you see? And I think that's a big thing. I think that's always been true, regardless of generation. But what are the things that you're seeing right now on campus with Gen Zers, the things that they're struggling with being away from home, right?
Mm-hmm.
The things that they're struggling with now that and I get what you're saying, that this can be a reprieve for lots of people because they can remake themselves. But what are some of the perhaps things that influencers should be concerned about? I'm thinking if I'm a parent or someone that loves a Gen Zer and they're away at college, what is it that I might not know that's going on right now?
That's good.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think the first thing that's coming to my mind is that people struggle a lot with discerning truth, and in the sense that they don't know which resource to trust. We're in like a world of just sources everywhere. There's content on content, and really we have the access, like on these things, we have the access to the entire like wealth of information that's out there. But all that wealth is not of value if we don't know what to believe out of it. And so I think one of those things is people struggle in college, like with where to attend, like a local congregation is a huge thing, or like mentorship is really rare to be consistent in people my age, because we're kind of in this journey of seeking truth, and then we don't really have a guide in that. It doesn't seem we kind of have this, we've become our own guide for the first time in our life, and we don't have like people in positions of authority other than professors, and even them, like it's pretty impersonal when you have 80 kids in a class. You know,
they're not exactly nurturing students for the most part. They're kind of doing their thing.
Yeah,
you got 80 kids. How can you?
It's not like a blame on them. It's more of the environment doesn't leave us. Like I have 20,000 students on this campus. You can't expect 20,000 mentors to just appear and like make themselves known. Like there's got to be a give and take and initiation with our, like it's coming into a huge independent busyness of a schedule, and learning to like set yourself up for success with mentorship and with, because that takes humility too, which we aren't necessarily in that age where we think we need people to tell us what we believe. We kind of want to discover it for ourselves. And yet people that have journeyed farther than us in life, it's good to heed their wisdom. And yet it's one of the least probably experienced things, and it's one of those things I think would be a huge solution to a lot of our identity crises and like our struggles to discern what's true in all sorts of matters.
Do you think Gen Zers are intimidated to approach mentors, or do you think mentors are intimidated by Gen Z? Because one of the things I've seen, I think, is older people feel like your generation, because of technology, is way smarter than previous generations.
That's good.
So it's almost like they're reticent to engage because they're like, man, this kid might be smarter than me, which in all reality is probably true. But the one
to some
thing
degree, at least from a information knowledge taking in what the world is perspective, not from experience, right?
And
but you can't Google experience.
No.
You can't Google success.
You can't,
right? So mentors are super important.
I think the wisdom is what you receive from mentorship, and wisdom being the experiential knowledge and the knowledge of walking through life. And because we are, like, again, we have all the information. We're the information age, and yet you can have all the information and not know how to use it, and not know how to walk well with that. And so I think us, like, one of the biggest things we could learn in Gen Z is to heed information as wisdom, like how to, like the head to the heart kind of, transition.
Well, do you think that's where that's what I was asking about, intimidation. Do you think that's playing a big factor in it? Do you feel like you guys with your generation, like, what needs to happen, man? Do mentors need to like come and push themselves on? Because you're telling me there's a problem, right?
Yeah.
So why isn't it happening? Is it more on you guys or more on us? What do you think?
It's definitely a social passivity for us, and also I'm sure like as a mentor, it's intimidating to approach someone and say, I want to mentor you, because that like requires them to have the humility to say, I'm honored that you would like want to. And that's, I see that in like the Bible, though. Jesus goes to people and asks them to follow him. And then they follow, and they're excited about that following. But I don't know if our heart as Gen Z, though, is in that space of like, if someone asks us to follow, we're not necessarily like, I want to follow you. Thank you so much for the opportunity. We're more, we want to find our opportunities and make them for ourselves. And so it's like
that's a great point.
It's a two-way thing.
I remember when we were talking at GCU, and that time you talked about Gen Z wants to be known. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, we're in a unique place in that, like, you look at social media, it's all really erupted in the last, like, during our generation. It didn't really exist before then, and so every person technically has a world stage, and that's a crazy place to be in, is that we are all, like, everything I put on the internet, the entire world has access to. Not saying they all look at it, But
possibility is there.
Right. So I guess we want to be the influencers, which makes influencing us hard in a sense, is that and that's kind of
great point.
That's kind of the weird thing is that, every person is, in one sense, kind of, they could possibly become an influencer and they want to get there, but they don't necessarily want to take the steps to sit under someone else in order to get there. You know what I mean? Because I think the notion is that if we figure out how to get ourselves there, then we can kind of be one of those stories that you hear about, like, oh, I made it and everyone denied me. And like, we kind of want that for ourselves.
Yeah. And I think there's some legitimacy to that, though, because what happened before the rise of technology is people had to pay their dues, man. Mm-hmm. And if you were sharper than the guy over you, it didn't matter. Mm-hmm. You had to shut up and learn how to eat poo-poo for a little while. Yeah. Because that's what develops character, is if you sit there, shut up, and do what you're told, And so there's a comment that I've heard before. Well, I mean, but that's the point, right? Yeah. And so, like, the reason that you're feeling this way about your influence and that you're aggressive towards it is appropriate, Mm-hmm. And you guys have the tools now to go after that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's just learning to utilize them.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. But I do think that there's the reality of needing the wisdom, mm-hmm. and the support, which mm-hmm. is way different than being told what you're supposed to do.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So you're standing in front of a group of people, influencers, parents, teachers, coaches, people that want to impact Gen Z, want to help Gen Z, walk with Gen Z, encourage Gen Z, inspire them. What are some important things that group of people should know about your generation? Like, what do they need to know, good and bad? Yeah,
that's a really important question. I think is the good thing is that we're asking that question because I think the first thing is that we need to be cared for where we are before any sort of correction comes in, and I think one of the common phrases actually in Young Life is to earn the right to be heard, and that's such an important thing in us walking alongside a generation that's below us is that, like, I want to know someone cares about me before they start telling me what to do, and so it's got to be an earned thing, but at the same time there will be those times when you've got to speak truth into their life when it hurts, because that's real love, and I think that's being lost too.
But you got to earn that place.
Yeah, because if you just speak hard truth, and even if it's from a loving place, they won't receive it as that unless they know. True. And so that love's got to be there, and sometimes you can just tell. I think we've got a good sense in Gen Z of when someone cares or if they just want to share their influence, because we are such an influencing culture. We kind of know when someone's got their thing and they want to share it with us, and then we also know when someone really wants to know about us.
Really?
Yeah, you can tell.
How can you tell that? Like, are there stories that you've experienced that with before? Or
yeah,
anything come to mind when you're thinking about it? Because that's a profound point to be making.
Totally. Yeah. I'll say it in more of a general sense that I think what happens is you'll be in some sort of discussion with someone, and really quickly you can find, and maybe this is me because I'm a comm major, I'm like, communication is definitely something I'm really into, but I see as soon as, like, the way someone speaks and the way that they're listening, you can pick up pretty quickly if they have an agenda or if they really care about listening to you. And I think listening's a lost art in our culture because we want to speak so bad and be heard, and yet, like, I think that being heard is only possible through a listening heart. It's like a teachability has to be mutual, and I think we learn best through that, and we've lost that kind of art.
That's good, bro. Man. Yeah, and that definitely speaks to this thing that we're seeing with Gen Z, which is collaboration. So you guys don't necessarily want to be told what to do per se, but you want to be able to come together and have a mutual conversation where both parties learn, and then we can kind of discover some sort of answer together and move forward, as opposed to, hey, this is what you should do. Yeah. You guys are like, no, let's talk about it, come to a conclusion together, and then move forward on that conclusion together.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you see, like, the victim culture that we're in too. Everyone's kind of wanting their case to be the most tragic.
Wow.
And I think that because of that, like,
well, what about this guy's tragedy?
Yeah, like, and then there's, like, the abstracts. Like, yeah, of course there's hungry people across the world, but, like, in my life, look, I'm in this turmoil because we all feel this weight of brokenness, and yet we want our brokenness to be seen. We want to be noticed in our state, but we also want to be, like, looked at as conquerors of that stuff, and yet we're not there
because your generations. It's kind of like what Gracie was saying last week. She was like, what social media has provided us is like, oh, poverty, I can't do anything about it. Mm-hmm. But when social media shows all of us, I can't, but together we can.
Yeah,
it was interesting. I'm curious, like what. Like, I never saw the things that you guys see now when I was your age.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, and what has that done? Has that changed the way you guys talk about stuff? Has it changed your conversations? Has it changed the way you feel? Like, what has it done to grow up and be able to see that, like, all this bad stuff is happening in the world all the time?
Yeah.
Because I just didn't know that when I was a high schooler. I didn't know that when I was.
The world's broken, I think.
Yeah, and I think the first word that like sadly comes to my mind, I think, is desensitization. Like we've just become numb to it, and you can get into video games and all that, but I think the bigger point is like you see, the news is operated off of negativity for our entire lives. And so we're not surprised by negative stories, even like tragedies that are happening, like school shootings. It's like, oh yeah, it's another one. But I have a personal like experience with. I knew someone that was shot in a mall, and that was the first time I'd heard of Sandy Hook and like all these famous ones. But this mall shooting in one of our local malls happened, and actually one of my coaches from one of my sports was shot and killed, and that was the first time it really hit me. Which to me, like looking back on that was when I was in middle school. But looking back on that, I realized that our whole culture does this. If it doesn't affect us personally, like nothing against that. We actually just, it's not that we don't care. We've just been desensitized to how much it's happening. And so it doesn't become like real in a way to us unless it happens to us. Like, and it affects us personally.
That's profound.
I was in New Zealand during that Christchurch shooting. It was the same way. You hear about all these world events that are happening for the last few years, and some horrible fires were happening in my home state while I was in New Zealand. And then it didn't really feel as real as when I was in New Zealand and feeling the weight around the people that knew family members or friends that were in those mosques being shot up. And it's so weird because, yeah, we're aware of all the world problems way more than ever before, but it's almost as if we aren't provoked to action unless it's in our lives, Coronavirus is definitely showing that, like how much we care about this versus things that, like Australia's fires, like I cared and I prayed and my heart goes out to them, but like I wasn't provoked to action nearly as much as my government cares a lot more right now because we're directly influenced, Yeah,
and to be honest, like your whole country being burnt by fire or getting a cough and a sneeze from coronavirus.
Yeah. And
like, look at the overreaction. Like, we care so much when it's us that we even go to these great lengths to, like, push the country towards socialism by giving wealthy people trillions of dollars to fix the stock market. It's like we make all of these crazy decisions and do this stuff. But
yeah, it's almost like our action doesn't come until we're affected, and it reveals to me in my own heart first, and then I see it around me too, is the selfishness that's really, like, it's hard to come to terms with. We want to think we're above that, and somehow we're the one that cares when no one else does. And I think that I'm actually, like, if I'm being honest with myself, you have that famous quote, like, this guy responded to a news article that was about some tragedy, and he said. He was asked the question, what's wrong with the world? And then he said, I am. And that was the entire response. And I think we don't have a culture that's willing to say that anymore. And yeah, that's probably what's needed most. And Gen Z is not apart from that. We need to be self-disclosing and we need to be like aware that we are part of the problem, not just the problems are out there. And if we just did this, it'll be fixed. There's a lot of things that are being offered that aren't working.
Yeah, I feel there's a lot of truth to that with Gen Z, and I've seen that with. I've often wondered, how is this old man Bernie Sanders so popular with these young people, right? And I think that's hitting on some of that a little bit. You know what I mean?
Well, you have people, and we don't need to, like, it doesn't need to be all politicized, but I think that there is something to be said. Is like we hear, oh yeah, tuition is paid for. We don't really think about the implications because we don't have that wisdom. We just have the knowledge.
That's my point, right? Like you see a problem, and so maybe you adopt, and I don't want to say bad, but there's not a lot of fans of socialism out there, right? You see a problem, and you're easily persuaded to jump on board with this idea.
Totally.
Right? because it sounds good or whatever. But perhaps the real issue is, like you're saying, it's only enforcing our own sense of selfishness.
Yeah, and I think it comes from our narrow scope, and we just gotta have like an idealistic mindset sometimes. Like, oh, yeah, that's such a good idea. And like even incarceration, we spend so much money on it. Like, oh, let's just release them all. Like we don't like you have to think about the implications of that. And the crime rates exploding in states like California as you release way too many prisoners at once. And I'm not saying that we should be spending all that money, but we need to be wise in the way we solve some of those problems.
And I think that's the deal, man. That's a good thing you're hitting on. I think that Gen Z has seen all these terrible things like police brutality, the government running away, after 2008, doing what they did essentially, you know what I mean? Crashing, getting our economy to where it is now. I think Gen Z has grown up and they've seen these things, 9/11, right, or heard about them. They've been really close, and so it's like, hey, let's fix it.
Yeah.
But kind of like you're hitting on, like maybe the fix is like, hey, we need a little.
It's a little bit more nuanced and complicated than we're giving it credit.
Yeah.
Well, I'd say, and this might be a bold statement, but I'd say that one of the biggest things I've realized is that the secular culture we live in is actually very religious, but the religion is politics, and that's where we think change is going to ultimately happen, and you just don't see that. Policies change, and yet people still remain in this broken state. There's got to be something beyond that, which definitely is influenced in my life by my faith. I see that there's just a need for more than policy to be our religious practice, or like our savior in a sense,
Yeah, it's good, bro.
Agreed. Yeah, man.
It's really good. So another thing that I've heard about Gen Z in particular is this idea of social entrepreneurship, right? So you guys are supposed to be the most socially entrepreneurial generation we've ever seen. You guys are going to change the world, and I want that to happen personally.
Yeah, me too.
Like, somebody needs to do it. You know what I'm saying? Because, like, whatever's happening here, it ain't working. Right?
Yeah.
And so as you're walking around the college campus, if you have friends with ideas and you have friends that are trying to do things and are about certain things, like, what are you seeing with regards to that social entrepreneurship?
Yeah, it's a really good point, because I think we get really cynical sometimes of like all the problems, and we forget though, and I see it in a college campus more than most places. Like, we are definitely a generation of dreamers, and we have big ideas of where we could be, and we want to get there. And so you see, like, I think universities, I just heard this recently, I don't know if it's true, but it sounds cool. It's like university comes from like the unity in diversity and of ideas and of ways of life. And I like that, because it's a place where I feel like I go and I have people coming from all sorts of walks of life. And I actually get to collaborate with them and say, like, how do we want to be positive contributors to this next generation, and like really watch the world restored from some of the places it's in. And I'm really excited about that. As far as like the big visions that I see, like, it depends on the person you're talking to, but I see people want to be just completely involved in all sorts of places in like the business world, in politics, and in justice, as well as in the churches, and a generation of people that want to just shake things up from where they've kind of seemed to settle in America. And I think even this virus is really interesting in that it's seeming to wake us up from a lullaby we've been in, and like this kind of sleepiness I've seen of America being like, we were just
explain that a little more. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, like you look at
the
different
sleepiness of America.
You look at just different statistics, and you look at like the economy was just in probably the best state it's been in my life, and yet like these things not working, and that's kind of just like coasting through life, kind of becoming automatic. That's what I've kind of seen in like a broader scale. I know people have their uniqueness in their daily lives, but overall, it just seems like we've kind of been like hoping that capitalism will just continue growing more and more, and like to what extent, there's and I think that's why we are a generation that's so fixed on meaning and purpose, is because we've reached the end of like, making money just doesn't really work. Money doesn't buy happiness, all that kind of those little wisdoms,
Yeah, I've heard that you guys are compared a lot to the silent generation or the World War II generation.
Okay, yeah.
And it's interesting that you say that, because a lot of the Gen Zers that I talk to, it's like they admire the sacrifice that those guys went through when they got off the ships at Normandy and stormed the beach. It's like, where's our Normandy moment? Where's our sacrifice? It's almost like Gen Z wants to sacrifice. Like, they want to lose everything for some great cause, whereas like,
it's just cool.
The world, it is cool, man, because like you're sitting here questioning capitalism and saying like, man, we're tired of coasting, and I'm thinking like, Gosh, I don't think too many generations thought like that.
No.
Where they thought like, man, we're just coasting here. Yeah. We need to have some kind of tumultuous thing happen to shake up our society.
Yeah.
Totally. But that's in reality. I think when you have a society of people, and this is what made the silent generation great.
Yeah.
Unexpected things happened to them that disturbed the status quo, and society had to be completely reordered. Women went to work.
Totally.
You know what I mean? And so I think that there's something, and again, we did that because there was a threat from some outside person that was going to change the world,
right?
And make it one way.
Yeah.
And so it's almost like you guys have that sense of like existential crisis where you want to kind of step up to the plate the same way they did,
Yeah, totally. And you can look at different perspectives. You see like reform happens in these kind of eras of life. Like the church, it's called revival in a lot of senses. You see this like need, this craving that's beginning to become like unified. We're like unified in this craving for more and like better. And I see that, like I feel that in the church. I feel like people wanting to go on mission and just like go and be somewhere. Like big church leaders are like selling their life to go to other countries and just because they see a sleepiness here that they either want it to be woken up or they want they just want like a kind of awakening to happen where we start doing things rather than just saying we care and like actually doing that, like acting on those cares. And I think that has to happen individually, like from a burden coming on us of what we're to do, like rather than it being like every person is going to go fix world hunger. Like if you're burdened for hunger, go and like do something about that rather than just say that's bad,
Yeah.
And I think the hard thing about that is that we think we should be burdened for all of those things. But the reality is we can pour our life out and yet we can't solve all the problems ourselves. But we should be a part of solving them in a place that we feel burdened to,
And that's where the collaboration comes from, I think, like you were saying earlier.
Yeah.
So you're saying Gen Z are collaborators, What's the reason for that? Because you guys realize that if you collaborate, you can change something.
Totally. Yeah, and it's so weird, that like dichotomy, because we want to collaborate to actually get things done, but we also want to be unique, and that those things are fighting against each other, that tension.
Yeah.
It's like we want to be a part of something bigger than ourselves, but we also want to be big ourselves, It's a weird thing that we're wrestling with. And I mean, I guess, like I see it in my faith as a thing that I need people in order to be effective. But I also like see that there's not a lot of people that like share similar visions at times. And it's like you feel isolated and yet you need people. So like I think that's coming where we're kind of all feeling like that. And we're going to end up leaning on each other in cool ways. That's good, what I see us headed towards.
Like this coronavirus, man.
Yeah.
Like I had seen someone recently post a picture of a little old lady, and she was trying to shop in the grocery store, and there was nothing left. And people were like, hey, while you're filling your grocery, whatever cart full of toilet paper, don't forget, Ethel out there.
Yeah.
Who's not as fast as you are, who can't fill her grocery cart up.
Yeah.
And that picture hit me. I was like, dang.
Oh, man.
We get so panicked by stuff that all we care about is ourselves. But what about the people down the block on our neighborhood?
Totally.
What if I got 1,000 toilet paper rolls and they got none?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's like
I have like a thought on that. It's one of the things I'm thinking about right now, and this might like I don't mean to be rude to my like world that I'm in, but I think that in a lot of senses it kind of is something that really shows us who we are in this kind of moment, and it actually shows like people are behaving as if we're just animals.
Wow.
In a sense. Like you think about it, that's just straight to survival mode. Like, I survived my family. Me and my family need to survive. So, like you said, the faster person is getting the toilet paper. And like, wow, that's not going to necessarily directly lead to your survival. Like that's
survival
the heart.
The
heart is like,
Darwinism.
natural selection. And all of a sudden we forget what it means to be human and have compassion and love and like a care for others. And I think
it doesn't even register in the mind.
No, it's a panic. Like hysteria is funny because it shows people are like, really, we're just advanced animals if we're behaving like that.
Yep.
Because the thing is like love and care for like sacrifice, they don't make sense in a world where we're purely just trying to survive. But you see how many people are operating like that now that there's a circumstance. It just kind of shows what they're actually like. And I don't mean to be anything against them. It's just it's more of a revelation than it is like me being cynical towards them. Like it's what they're doing. And we just have to respond to that and say, is this really how we should be behaving in a crisis, or should we like lean, like, because we love the idea of building a shelter for someone in a flood, but when we're in the flood, we kind of want to just survive. It seems like,
Bro.
Ow.
No, that's profound.
I'm gonna probably
say
listen back
ouch.
to that one.
That's gonna be
like,
good.
Somebody say ouch.
Ouch.
Question for you. It's something I've been chewing on as we've been talking. This issue with technology. So, with our generation,
Hold on, I gotta take this. No, I was kidding.
Good.
Our generation, we grew up without technology, right? Then we were introduced to the iPhone.
Well, not any technology. You guys had technology.
I mean, we did, right? But not in any way
That's
that
a
we
good
do
point.
today.
Yeah.
Right?
Nice
And
correction,
so, like,
GenZ.
I remember, right, sorry, bro. My bad. Thanks.
I
He
read
just fact-checked. He
collaboration.
just fact-checked you on air.
I read the headline of one article, and then I used that to support my argument towards you just now. That's what we did.
The copy and paste.
So I roasted us, I roasted you. We're good now.
Yeah, we're all in
Even?
the same boat. Collaborative roasting, guys.
I'm gonna tweet this article heading because I really believe everything about it. Yeah.
Wow.
Oh, sorry. It's got a little savage on there.
You got some bones to pick, huh?
Shade.
This could be like that 1 minute thing you put on
Shade.
Instagram, and then you're like, listen to the rest. It's really good.
That's right.
No, we already got that, what you just said.
Yeah.
But hey, so I remember the days when I'd sit on the stairs and be on the landline trying to talk to my girlfriend, and then my mom would get on the line, and I'd have to tell her to get off, right?
Oh man.
And so, yeah, you're like, oh man, right? And then we fast forward. Now I've got all this technology. I got my MacBook here. We got the cameras on. We got the lights and that stuff. It's great. It's awesome. But I remember a time when this stuff didn't rule my life, and I know how to interact with people outside of this.
Right.
And so it's interesting because what I'm hearing is two things. I'm hearing of obviously Gen Z, super plugged into tech natives, all those different types of things. It's going to be interesting to see what happens to the generation that comes after you guys. But what we're also hearing is like there seems to be this revolt happening where people are recognizing like this technology thing's not working and I don't want to be a part of it anymore.
Yeah.
And so is that true? Is that happening?
Yeah, I mean, you look at some of these groups that like, they're not necessarily. It's like again one of those things we were talking about where it's I like the idea of being simple, but like we still use our phones all the time. I like the idea of like
Just one
talking to people in line. We have Chick-fil-A on campus, like talking to people in line at Chick-fil-A, but everyone's got their AirPods in and they're texting the person that they really need to text at that moment. You know, like I think we kind of almost worship this idea of being busy and having things to do, so that we don't have to have people get involved in our lives like locally and yet like we also I think have this longing on the other side for minimalism and for things like that where we have less and we are content, because I think we've pursued more for so long in America that like we want to be a generation that's like we're so satisfied in little, but we still like all the stuff we have and we haven't actually let go of it. We just want to, I think, you know.
Would you say like or dependent?
I'd say we depend on it. You feel like the ghost phone in your pocket sometimes buzzing, you know? It's almost like another organ.
Yeah.
It's like another organ, and we kind of I was just listening to this podcast a few days ago, and it's really interesting. He referred to the phone as like the most intimate relationship we have. We wake up in the morning, first person we see is our phone.
Yep.
Go to bed at night, it's the last thing we check, and there's like a weird intimacy there that I think we have to acknowledge, and like going a day without our phone sounds crazy now. Like,
it does.
Like operating a lot, like without a phone
You literally feel like a piece of you's missing.
Yeah, because we feel like we don't know how to function.
It's like you probably haven't experienced this yet, but like when I don't have my ring on, I feel naked.
Okay,
and it's the same thing. Like when you don't have your phone, you feel naked.
Yeah, I think it is. It's like this weird because you don't know what to do. Like socially, we our boredom goes boom, like down to phone. You know, it's more of a it's like a safety net almost for social awkwardness, and I think like what if we
it's a way to check out, right? Like if this is making me uncomfortable right now and I don't like how the conversation's going, a way to ward that off or a way to send a passive communication to someone that I don't want to engage is to pick the phone up.
Totally.
It's really become like a safety blanket for people in a lot of ways.
Yeah, and like you guys were asking though, I think there's this opposite like force that's coming of us not wanting that. Like you hear about these things like phone stacks at a dinner table, and whoever picks up the phone first pays. Like those are kind of games I hear about people playing. And I have friends that they fast their phone once a week just for a day, and like that they're like it's crazy. I've been learning so much because I have to plan my whole next day ahead. It's like we've lost that ability by relying on something to do it for us, and when we don't know something, instead of like I'm gonna read about this for a bit, we just go Google. You know, Google's our quick answer guide, and that's actually what I think we got to see from that is we have shallow knowledge. Like the knowledge is there. We like, there's a fact about this I looked up, but we don't actually know like the depth of it that comes from study. And so like even in college, like if I'm being honest, oftentimes we can just go to a journal article and like use a couple keys like Control F, Control Find, and then just like find what we're looking for rather than reading and really discovering like what someone has to say. These are doctors that we're reading, and we're just like, yeah, that sounds good. It'll sound good in my essay. I can use that to support whatever I work with. And so there we are, like relying on technology so heavily to think for us almost that contemplation is kind of lost. Like we just kind of operate really quick though. It's quicker than our brains are. I think our phones are way too quick for our brains. And so we've lost things like reflection and contemplation.
Man, that's good, bro. So last question for you. As we always do, we kind of, for the most part, wrap up with Christian perspective. And so as we kind of close this thing out, what are you seeing with regards to faith in your generation? So, like, what are we seeing? And I mean, we can go general here. Obviously, we're Christians, right? And we specifically believe in Jesus. But as you're on a campus that, I mean, has Christian roots, but also has tons of people on there that are not Christian.
Yeah.
And that's the nature of our world, right?
Yeah.
Everybody doesn't believe the same thing. What are you seeing with regards to faith in your generation? How are they processing it? How are they thinking about it? How are they feeling about it?
Yeah.
How do they view people who believe and don't believe? And
And then just a little bit about your personal faith to wrap it up too.
For sure. Man, that's a really good question. I think one of the things I know that we're called to as Christians is to be aware of the times and like how to speak into them. And I think so. This question is great for knowing that. And so I've definitely thought about it a lot. And one of the things I see when I look at like the American Gen Z believer or non-believer is that we like are being fed one thing through education and another thing through whatever our belief system is. And it's almost like two different religions if you really want to be truthful with it.
Wow.
We're a secularized education system, and that's
pluralist.
Yeah, like naturalistic materialism is a religion in a sense, and that's what I was raised in. I'm a public school kid, and yet my church is teaching something different. And so again, we aren't necessarily sure how to reconcile those things. So the first thing you have is like I'm on a campus. It's a private Christian school. A lot of people probably go because of being in a Christian family. And yet I think that one of the things they're discovering in their identity thing that they're working through is actually, do I believe this stuff? Is this really practical for my life? How do I reconcile my faith with what I've been raised in, like in my education? And so I would say that our faith is one of, we're kind of relearning who Jesus is in a whole new sense than what we've kind of, because we've been raised
You mean the whole generation, you would say?
Yeah, I'd say like we've been raised in what I would call Christendom or like Christian culture.
Okay.
And so culturally, America is still seen as a Christian country, even like outside looking in. And yet, like even me going over to New Zealand, I saw like they're a Christian country that's like there's so lack of the reality of what it means to be Christian. And so we're rediscovering like what does it mean to be Christian? As we're also discovering like what does it mean to be human? I think we're discovering that. We're really getting back to the foundation. We've kind of lost the foundation, and so we have all this information, but it's not on top of anything solid. And so people are longing for a solidness and like a consistency. So I think that translates really well into our longing for discipleship, actually, is because if we have consistent
mentorship, discipleship.
Yeah, like we want a constant because we kind of feel lost in the swarm of like all this stuff in our world that's competing for our attention, really. I heard another thing I just heard recently was like, oh yeah, you're actually the product on Instagram. It's not like there's products there for you. Like you are the product, and they're seeing how much of your attention is being fought for, and like how like they even have like eye tracking on your cameras and stuff now. It's crazy, man.
Yeah, dude.
But so we have people like competing for us to influence us, and yet again, like I said, the discipleship is more I'm walking like this is how I'm walking, and I love you, and I like come follow me and watch my life. That's like what we want more than like listen to my words. It's watch my life. And I think those words are like they matter. And I think as a Christian, it's that balance. Like we should be sharing the gospel, the good news of Jesus with others, but also we should be walking the gospel. And I think there's been a big disconnect because it's easy to have lots of beliefs and intellectual battles in your mind about whatever thing, political, religious, but like, and you can create all the arguments, but the best argument, the best apologetic for my faith, I think, and I'm challenged by it daily, is how do I actually live this stuff? And so the best thing I think we can do, like wrapping that up to influence Gen Z, is to be living a life that is reflective of our beliefs. And then like those questions do come up. Yeah. And I think like also
that authenticity.
Yeah, like the humility has to come from our end to ask those questions when we see reality, when we see like a real authentic genuineness. Like all those things are all like similar words for, we want substance rather than like kind of just I think we're really used to people being really good at speaking and being eloquent in their speech, but not actually being necessarily raw, backing that with their real life. Yeah, and so for me in my faith,
man, that's good.
I'm headed. That's where I like what I'm becoming, and I'm hoping to become. And I'm building, like, I'm making my decisions. I'm building my life around becoming authentic in what I believe, and like being. The Bible talks about being not just a hearer of the word, but a doer. And I really see that. Like I went on that journey of not doing for the church or for Jesus, but being in Him, and like it comes from an overflow of being in Christ and being like
the human being, not the human doing.
And that, because the beautiful thing I think about the Christian story is, and it's widely misunderstood by the Christian culture that like people see, is that God in Jesus actually puts us in that position. Jesus lived this morally perfect life, and then He offers that life to us. I don't have to like uphold all these morals. I don't have to pray 5 times a day. I don't have to read my Bible consistently, serve at the church well. Like I am a mess, and I can acknowledge that. But my entire life is leaned on Jesus and His finished work, because He did it for me. He did what I could never do. Man. And like for me, that's like the one big thing that helps us feel this kind of unconditional, like positive regard, as psychology would say. Like this, I don't need to change and like be different before I'm accepted by God. And then that flows into my life as I like get to live that out. And then I like even living that out, it's not a pressure of me performing well, because like anything good, like any of that moral perfection that I'm headed towards is coming from Jesus. It's so it's both that I live in Christ and God sees Jesus when He sees me. That's what He's chosen, which is what I call grace. And it's amazing to see that like whenever like my worst day, God chooses, because I've leaned my trust and faith in Jesus. God sees Jesus and not my brokenness. And then when I get to actually go practically do stuff in the world, then I'm actually empowered by Him to do that stuff. And so that for me, that makes all the dreaming that we do have as a generation way more possible. And so the thing I want to be an influencer in and be influenced towards is becoming someone who's in Christ and Christ is in them, and just available. I think like don't want to be someone who's like labeled, and I think I am right now, but I don't want to be labeled as busy as much as I am labeled as available, because I think that busyness is so worshipped, and yet it's actually so damaging.
Yeah, man.
When we're not like, because you think about how many times in the Bible Jesus just is interrupted, or He, instead of going straight to the biggest synagogue, the biggest church, He just goes to a well and talks to a woman. Yeah. That's like so countercultural. And if I'm not available to that stuff, I think I'm gonna miss out on a life that God might have for me that's way better than one that I have for myself. And so yeah, that's it, man. That's the summary of my faith and where I'm headed. And I hope that like when people ask me if I'm a Christian, like my answer recently, I like this a lot, is not yeah I am. It's watch my life, and that's a big challenge for me. And for them, it's an invitation in to my life. I want them to see it rather than like just I can say that I am. Most people say they are, but what does that actually mean? And I think what it means is it's reflected in your life.
That's good, man.
Man, that's good, bro.
Yeah.
Dylan, thank you, brother. Appreciate your time. Thanks for being here with us today and sharing with us what it means to be a Gen Z, because obviously I don't know.
Yeah.
And John doesn't know, but you know.
I mean, I have some that are on the cusp, but they're
going to be alphas, yeah. So that's a whole different conversation.
Oh, pray for me.
All right.
Oh, man.
Episode 23. Hope I did that right.
23, yeah.
Was it supposed to be that way? I don't know.
It doesn't matter.
They all got it covered now. In the books. Find us on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, YouTube. What did I miss?
Twitter.
Man, look at that right there. He's on it.
That's right. Still trapped.
He's got his stocks on Twitter right now. Let's go.
Right? Hey,
you heard me talking about that earlier.
Get them stocks.
Yeah.
Twitter's down right now. Perfect time to buy.
This is the beginning of the conversation, not the end, right? And so hopefully this is going to spur you on to have conversations with us and with different people. We love you guys. We will talk to you soon. Peace.
Peace.